Tonight we're going to be talking about propaganda. There's a lot of information George is going to be sharing tonight. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. George will stop a couple of times so you can like ask your question. But if you have a question while he's talking, just put it in the chat, and then we can interrupt him. And as
Hey, Bill.
always, I always encourage everybody to look at the chat. People put in lots of interesting information in the chat, so I encourage you to look at that. And now I will turn it over to George.
Thought it was an idea. We've kind of had this little science bent going for a while. I'm over here because I'm going to bring up pictures over here. But we've been on a little science kick for a while. But it's good to have that information and to even just to review it, because the more we know about how the brain works and how we can be fooled, the better off we're going to be in our messaging. So a quick note about terms. Mentioned this before. I go back and forth with this all the time, but we're going to try to use GOP to refer to the party and its cadre of strategists and anyone who absolutely wholeheartedly leans in to the kind of off the rails thing, and then use Republican to refer to people who vote Republican, but maybe can you know can are having second thoughts. I mean, after people voted for him the second time, I can understand the first time, but the second time, I wonder about that a little bit. But still, we'll leave the harbor open for the lifeboat Republicans who've thrown off the GOP ship. So, just in case. And we're going to, and talking about propaganda, there are many propaganda techniques. Logical fallacies are a subset of that, and they go by many names. In researching this, I've found there are so many different ways. There's so many different techniques that people come up with. There's not one master list that I found that covers everything, and some things are called by different names. I've picked ones tonight that I think are particularly appropriate because they're ones that are being used against us more often than not. And I may have also changed the names because why not? And it's fun. So we're also going to send links to sites that detail some of these kinds of propaganda, although you can pretty much get to these anyway by just Googling propaganda techniques, and all sorts of things come up. Also Google logical fallacies, because that'll bring things up too. And okay. Um, as I've mentioned before, people don't think like we think they think. They're not necessarily absolutely rational beings, although you can be trained to be that way. The Republican strategists know this. The word propaganda dates to the early 1900s, although certainly deception and manipulation using dishonest techniques has, I'm sure, been around since the cave people. That propaganda is frighteningly effective is easily seen around us in countless examples. Propaganda intentionally exploits known vulnerabilities in our mental armor that make us susceptible to deceptions. Sometimes we like this, like when we enjoy a magician's show. We've mentioned that before. However, political parties, authoritarians, psychics, 1-800 preachers, cults, unethical salespeople, and other charlatans rely on these techniques. Their purpose is the avoidance and or obfuscation of the truth, as well as a change in the beliefs and the behaviors of their victims. That's a very important part. The behaviors follow the change in belief. So, I'm going to put this guy up because propaganda often employs fear, uncertainty, doubt, and distraction, all of which can diminish the ability of people to think rationally. And for our purposes, the GOP propaganda goals are to distract from what they are doing and or distract from the Democrats' message, and to minimize either our messages and or to minimize the damages of their policy or of the things their electeds do. They want to level things and scale and avoid talking about the scale of things. So they create false equivalence, and they'll elevate an absurd argument by pitting it against a factual one. Good examples would be the climate crisis, where they'll trot out somebody from the Greening Earth Society or some other place to kind of fool everybody into thinking they actually have a real scientist. Or the notion of Antifa. We'll see that later. They also want to change the subject. They often, whatever the subject is, they're going to change it to something else. They're very good at pivoting. And so they'll say something like the real issue is, and then fill in the blank, which generally is something that has little to do with the topic of hand. It's meant to get us out of that space. I also, a goal is to create a new reality. And they'll do that by misstating our positions or ginning up conspiracy theories or alternative facts, which they appear to have in never-ending supply. And also projection, which is what projection is, and this is a big one, a very favorite one. They will project what they're doing onto us, and often as a way to, or obviously as a way to distract from what they're doing. We'll look at that a little more later too. And then the last goal that they have is to ensure the existence of the worldview, the right-wing worldview. And they do this through the right-wing media machine and spectacles that they can create that the media likes and eating up airtime. So let's look at some of the GOP's favorite tricks. And I'll point out first that many propaganda tactics consist of logical fallacies. And so the thing about a logical fallacies is they do not actually prove that an opponent's logic is false. They're basically mistakes, often intentional, that people make in reasoning. And we know from the science that people do it all the time. Propagandists add a veneer of logic to their argument to get you to accept it. They're the genuine, original, simulated walnut vinyl veneer, a veneer of argument. It sounds logical and persuasive. It looks like real wood, but it's not logic. It is not a logically valid refutation of an opposing argument. And because people don't, by default, think in formal logic, but they think they do, or ought to anyway, logical fallacies can bring them to a point where they believe that lies are actually well-reasoned and logical. So it's very, very interesting that the strategists have to know what the reality is in order to be able to use logical fallacies to fool people. It shows you that the strategists are fully aware of what they're doing. They're not just true believers who happened on these logical fallacies. And a good example of it is one logical fallacy called the reduction to binary choices. It's basically an either-or frame. A good example is the term democratic socialism, which is accurate as a description of Bernie's position and of democratic socialists and of a lot of progressives. But it's a nuance, and that doesn't fit in an either-or frame. We have a binary culture in the West. If anybody who's studied Eastern philosophy knows that things are a lot more of a continuum in Eastern philosophy. There are as many viewpoints as there are people to view things, whereas here in the West it's very much binary, and so we fit things into that. So democratic socialism doesn't fit, so it's unconsciously converted in people's brains to socialism, because that's a word, it's a trigger word, and it's a word that they understand. They believe they understand democracy, but socialism is something that, well, my grandfather fought against it, all this. So their brain just automatically converts it to socialism. That's what they hear. That's the difference between what you say and what people hear. You don't think of an elephant moment again. And very importantly, like any frame, either or types of discussions constrain the discussion. It erases other points of view and forces you to think only in this or that. It does away with nuance and continuums. So I thought I'd mention that one first. There are a lot of other logical fallacies. These are taught to lawyers because it's absolutely important that they know when they're getting, a fallacy thrown out into the courtroom to try to influence the jury. And so it's very, very big there. There is, so a regular propaganda technique, another one that's a very favorite one of the right is the straw man, which is misstating your opponent's position and then arguing vehemently against it. So here's an example. Senator number one says, I cannot support increasing the Pentagon's budget. Senator number two says, my opponent wants to leave America defenseless. So they've created this straw man argument that Senator one really doesn't even want to have an army or any defenses, which isn't what's going on. Another one is the war on Christmas. Just thought I'd throw that out because Christmas is coming up. There's also this it's a pairing or association, and through endless repetition, you define your opponent the way you want people to think of them. So Democrats are taxers, spenders, baby killers, they're immoral. If you want more of those words, we will send you a link to a document called Language, a Key Mechanism of Control by evil genius Frank Luntz, which was handed out to Newt Gingrich's first crop of new Congress people back when he was putting his contract out on America. And so that's another one. That's very interesting reading if you haven't read it. It's on our website, but we'll get you the link. And here's another one, and this is, I call it leveling. It's also called scale, or both-siderism, or whataboutism. And these are used in response to a factual and well-reasoned argument or position. The speaker simply deflects criticism by saying, well, what about, and fill in the blank. As with many of the following things and the things we've been talking about, this trick achieves multiple goals that we saw above. And I'm going to play a video right now of a little bit of whataboutism I saw just this week.
Turning down the volume and finding a way to love thy neighbor is a good answer for all of us. But I do want to ask, Republicans at large are turning a blind...
Hold on a second. I don't know if I shared the screen or not.
You did.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
You can always just look over here and see if you have, because
Yeah, it doesn't say I did, but if everybody can see it, if you're on speaker view, you would see it. Okay, good. All right, start again.
Turning down the volume and finding a way to love thy neighbor is a good answer for all of us. But I do want to ask, Republicans at large are turning a blind eye to the Capitol rioters, except for Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And that does give these rioters, that violent movement, a wink and a nod to do it again. What place do you have in a GOP that's cool with that?
Well, there are 4 federal agencies that are investigating January 6th. You have DHS, you have the FBI, you have the Secret Service, you have the Department of Justice. There have been over 600 arrests for January 6th. There are also 10 committees in the House and the Senate that are investigating January 6th. So those things are happening. I was in a, but there's, in addition to January 6th, there's been violence across the country as well. I'm the ranking Republican on the Civil Rights Subcommittee within the Oversight Committee. And we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago with the FBI, and I learned that we don't track cases of violence of Antifa, right? I mean, there's lots of violence, domestic terrorism and foreign terrorism in this country, and we should be treating all of these things equally.
So there were a few things in there, but the quick reference to Antifa. So there's a reason why the FBI isn't bothering to track Antifa. They're really hard to find because they're not organized. There aren't very many of them, and they're just not on the radar. Like the huge difference in scale when you take a look at the Proud Boys and all the various militia groups and many of these neo-Nazi groups. And we just way more of them. They're way more dangerous. So she mentions it to change the subject and to level things out and erase the scale. So I thought that was interesting. I'll stop and ask some questions here, because in these things where I'm going through a lot of stuff, I think it's a good idea to ask a few questions. Anybody got a question or on any of this? Comment?
Greg put a question in the chat. How much is the lament that Democrats have no message, a planted bit of propaganda intended to distract and create a false reality in which we are incompetent? And I've actually wondered that about a number of things. Sometimes I watch on the news, and it's like if you keep saying over and over again that Democrats can't get their act together, Democrats can't work together, it's like yeah, that's not the case, but people keep saying it, so then it starts to feel like it's true.
I'll cop to doing it in our meetings. I've been on a crusade to get Democrats to message better, so I've certainly said that. But when I use my outside
you said
voice,
that, George, you said that, and it's true that we have to be better, and that's why we're all here. But what
yeah,
I hear from our own people all the time
right.
is we simply never, ever, ever have gotten it right in all of history. Don't have it right now, and that'll be in the middle of listening to some good messages. I think it's a really extreme position that a lot of Democrats simply believe that we've never even thought about messaging.
No, and you're absolutely right. And there are some great practitioners. My most favorite in the world is Jen Psaki. She's on top of things, as is the whole Biden communications group. The Obama folks did a pretty good job of it. Elizabeth Warren's a natural. Bernie's really good at it. And so that is important. And the other thing is the idea that something along that line is when they say that that Democrats, well, like the spending bills that are being talked about, they're calling them spending bills. So we've been tarred so much with that brush that they have that. But there's also this idea Democrats will never win in 2022. Democrats are in big trouble in 2022. And these articles are coming out by people on our side. Believe me, my question is, who are they talking to? Who are the Democrats they're looking to talk to? You and I, everybody I know who actually gets off their butts and knocks on doors and calls people and texts them and does whatever they do. We all know that. You're not, we all know what a tough fight this is. And if you guys are going to help out, stop complaining and get down there in the trenches with us and make it happen. But those narratives over and over that kept being thrown out there in public when we use our outside voices, it's self-defeating. It's stupid. You don't hear the Republicans going, "Oh, we could be in trouble this election." They're going, "Well, we're going to win," even when it's obvious they won't. Do we have another one? Hobie says, "Yeah, love it or leave it." There's your binary there. And
I see people are putting in articles about good messaging and that kind of thing. I will also, when I send out my follow-up email, I'm keeping track of these, and I'll also send the links out for those in that email as well.
And Betsy mentions here, are you going to give suggestions about what to do about it? Yes, I mean, I will where I can in here. I'm going over some material. In general, these Monday night sessions, we do focus very much on what to do about it. But in general, with propaganda, what you want to do, number one, is detect that it's happening. That's really important. Once you detect that it's going on, then okay, well, they're trying to erase the scale. So my message is going to talk about the scale in the right-wing groups versus Antifa. I'm not going to talk about Antifa. I'm going to say the reason the FBI is not paying attention to that group you mentioned is because the other groups are way more huge in number, and these people attack the Capitol, that kind of thing, and likewise for other things. So you need to know what's happening. When you do, just turn it around. Just go, or in many cases, if they're changing the subject, refuse to change the subject and go back to it. Refuse to engage them. We've said many times before here, you are under absolutely no obligation to respond to a Republican who comes out with some crazy message. You're not talking to the Republican. You're not having debate club. What you're doing is you're trying to reach people who might be listening to the both of you, if that person's even there. If they're not there, why are we spending any time on their messages? In fact, a good example is you probably get these in the mail like I do. There'll be a message, really, a conservative message or far right wing message, and then right under it is the real explanation of that message. Now, their message is in bold, and then we've got a paragraph or two under that explaining why they're wrong. So what we've done in this case, or the people who do this, is you've just put in bold the Republicans' message. So now you've educated people who may not have thought very deeply about this subject in all of the arguments that your opponent is using. So you don't want to do that. So this, so don't repeat them. Another good general rule. And yes, Betsy, I will try to do that as much as I can in here. Okay, let's see. So let's go to the next one. And this is projection. And projection is this is very, very popular. Trump was a master of it, but the Republicans are very good at it. I also call this, I know you are, but what am I? Because sometimes you can learn everything you need to know in kindergarten. So this is anticipating what your opposition may rightfully accuse you of doing, and then blaming them for doing it. A great example is the constant painting of Democrats as spenders and Republicans as fiscally responsible when Republican administrations routinely outspend the Democrats. And this is something that even we talk about, and that shouldn't happen. They've been so successful at this that even MSNBC last week and other networks, but even MSNBC, labeled the infrastructure plan and the Build Back Better plan on the screen in the chyron at the bottom as Biden's spending wins. I mean, seriously, this is rookie stuff. Yes, I'm complaining about the Democrats who don't do this, but oh my God, that's such a rookie mistake. Don't do that. I mean, this is a human infrastructure bill. They were fine in calling the infrastructure bill an infrastructure bill. You could call this a human infrastructure bill, or you could call it a number of other things.
An investment.
In investments. Yeah, Liz.
The other thing I thought about this week too is I really get tired of media stating what is not in the bill or what's been cut versus saying what isn't it. Like I wouldn't
Yes.
even mention all that stuff that they
Yeah.
left out. What is in it? Not like, oh, well, they didn't get this, then they didn't get that, and it drives me crazy because I also find that I don't care who it is, whether it's MSNBC or CNN or whatever the news organization is, they take one refrain and they repeat it ad nauseum. So again, then you think that's true because you hear it so many times.
Right.
Drives me crazy. Also, I want to point out something because you've got me thinking a little bit because I'm
Uh-oh.
starting to notice things. Yeah, in a good way.
Okay.
So I was watching, this was, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so, I don't know, watching Rachel Maddow, and she announced at the beginning of her show that she had skin cancer. Okay. The next day, I see a headline that says Rachel Maddow announces she has cancer. So there's a big difference between skin cancer and cancer.
Yeah.
Slight, but it's a big difference, and it attracts people to click on it because it sounds more dire and doom and gloom, and quite frankly, it's just skin cancer. I'm sorry, I had it. It's not like a big deal if you catch it early, right? So I'm just saying, I'm really being hypersensitive to how the news puts out things in their headlines.
I think Hobie put in the chat that the media, they like the conflict, and so however they can set something up as a conflict, even on MSNBC, to say what's been taken out of a bill sets up a conflict between Democrats because
Correct.
Democrats have forced other Democrats to take something out of a bill.
Correct. Right, exactly, Lisa. Right. Yeah.
I mean, I know they have to, that if it bleeds, it leads, and they love to cover conflict and spectacle because that gets eyeballs, and that's what they're in business for. It's unfortunate. I don't like it, but I kind of wonder sometimes if they actually spend some time talking about what's really in bills, what is really happening, going in depth. I mean, the quality of a lot of reporting, even on major networks, is mediocre at best. Sometimes Lisa and I will be sitting there watching the news, and I'll go, I'll ask like 3 very simple questions after a news report and realize we didn't get any answers to them. It's like, how in the world, why did you mention that if you're not going to say why that happened or what that is or whatever? The media is a problem. And some of it is that it's something you can do is call them on it. Go on their Facebook page and complain and make them accountable for it. I have no illusions that Comcast or any of these other giant media companies are going to change their tune, but hound those journalists. I mean, maybe in some subtle way it'll nudge them back towards being real journalists and getting a little more careful about their language. But they need to get language too. We talk about it. It helps us to learn it. The media really needs to learn this, and I'm really shocked that this is not in their training. I hear the reasoning that they're supposed to be reporting the facts and the news, and then opinions are opinion. But we sure get a lot of opinion out of them also. When they're doing that, at least they could be using more proper words. And just looking here. Okay. Now, to see if there are any more questions. I'll move on to the next one. This one I call, this is co-opting, or what I call, hey, you ate my fries. Who said this? Give you a moment. If anybody knows who that is or it has a guess, shout it out.
Was it Ike?
Was it Ike? Did you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. There's a point here.
There are no wrong answers.
Okay. I think I've scared everybody into answering
Bill Clinton?
Bill Clinton, good guess. Not the guy. One
Well,
more.
Reagan then is the only other possibility, right?
Well, it's Trump.
It's Trump.
It's Trump.
No, he couldn't say that many words strung together. Someone else must have helped him with that.
Somebody wrote that for him for sure.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Obviously, he didn't do that, but he wrote it. And though there is a populist thread running through the far right now, in many ways, in this case, this was obviously, like you say, it wasn't written by him, by one of his speechwriters / strategists. And what they did is when you look at that message, you go, boy, that's a really good message for Democrats. Why don't we talk about this? Why aren't we saying this? Or maybe we did say it. But it turns out that Trump said it. Now, of course, Trump was lying about it, but he did say this. And this is also a message that you heard in a very, very similar way from Bernie. And in 2016, I know we've talked about it before. When I saw this quote and thought about it, I said, and saw that there were people on the right going, yeah, well, I like Trump, but I like Bernie too. And I'm sitting, how in the world, in what universe could people like Trump and Bernie? They're opposites. But the reason was because Trump was lying. But this message appeals to people on the right too. And it's really interesting to think about, if Bernie had gotten the nomination, what might have happened. It's possible he could have pulled some people over because he and Trump had the same message. It's crazy. So, I mean, their GOP is just, they're masters of figuring out what our message should be and then claiming it as their own because they have no scruples about, stating things like that and doing nothing about it. And so I think we have to be on guard for that. I think the response to that and what we can do is if they start doing that, that doesn't mean that we drop it and stop talking about whatever they've claimed. That means we just keep talking about it more. Make sure we're saying it more than they are about ourselves when it's our message. So anyway, okay, I got another video for you. This is known as the fire hose or the gish gallup. And the fire hose refers more to the spewing out into the media of endless messages. The gish gallup is used in particular when a speaker has the floor for a moment, and what they'll do is unleash an endless and rapid stream of half-truths and lies meant to dominate the available time and leave an opponent unable to respond to all the charges made. There's just too much there. You don't even know where to begin. Examples are the conservative interviewee ignoring a media question and continually repeating talking points over and over, but just having too much happening. And this is a really interesting video, and I've annotated it to show how many times, how many different things are thrown in there. Let me pop this there.
What a cop-out, Anna. You say you don't want to debate. Is that because you don't know if you have the science on your side? Your reference to the death threats, I proudly post the publicly available emails of scientists who make absurd claims, and I just help bring the public to these scientists who can finally hear the anger, the frustration, the intellectual arguments against them. The point is not to send abuse to scientists. The point is they can hear from the public, and of course, any public figure is going to get a percentage of abuse. Where we are now in 2011 with the whole global warming debate, I argue that from A to Z, the man-made global warming movement has literally egg on their face. And I'm talking from the Arctic, which is now 9,000 Manhattans over the low point of 2007. Sea level, which contrary to predictions of it accelerating, has actually dropped, an historic drop, according to the European Space Agency and NASA. Polar bears at or near historic population high. Global temperatures that hit their high point in 1998. Claims of 2005, 2010 being the hottest years are based on hundreds of a degree Fahrenheit. It's a political statement. You can't even get a margin of error to even approach what they're claiming. 111 countries, Gallup did a survey. The majority of the human race isn't afraid of global warming. Anna, you should not be affiliated with a movement that proved itself subprime science, subprime economics, and subprime politics. You are the face of one of the greatest threats of our liberty, and that is intellectual international bean counters trying to control average people's lives because they think they know better how people should live, because if people are left to their own devices, will somehow destroy the planet. It is a mockery. You've been had. You need to go back and re-examine your conscience, Anna.
My conscious?
Conscience.
I'm pretty conscious, and I have looked at the evidence.
Your intellectual conscience.
Mm.
I'm getting silence.
No response to that?
I'm getting silence here. I'm trying to be as personable and likable as I can be.
And I'm curious, you don't want to discuss anything at all?
I'm really happy to listen to what Mark has to say, but as I said at the start, I'm not going to be engaging in point-to-point debate because he is known for making things up.
What did he make up?
Do a simple Google search, you will find hundreds of examples.
What did you make up, Mark?
I don't know. I can't defend myself against non-attacks, is what she's doing. Basically, she's saying I'm a liar, so she won't talk to me.
And look, it's a real problem in this debate that those of us who are, you know, not prepared yet to be convinced that man is causing dangerous global warming just get attacked personally all the time.
Nick, how can you say that yet have brought me to the worst of the worst Republican attack dogs? I would have thought that you, of all people, would pick a different kind of spokesperson to take me to in Washington.
Well, I have enormous respect for Mark. I think he runs one of the most interesting websites there is on this issue. He's done enormous work in Congress on exposing a lot of the exaggeration. No, look, I really want to thank you, Mark, for giving up your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
Enjoyed it.
Nice meeting you.
Thanks for taking
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Good on you, mate.
I just love that the woman who is doing what you should do. You don't engage those guys. But that guy, I mean, he had, at least as far as I could count there, at least 33 different claims that would need an assert, or either sentences or words that and assertions that could be dealt with if one wanted to. But she did the right thing. She basically didn't engage him. She called him out on the lies, which is another important thing to do, and basically just walks away. Says, I don't want to deal with it. I had her name up, and of course I'm forgetting, but she started a youth environmental group and has gone on to be an author, a famous author in Australia, and very involved in the climate movement. And she's just very good at this. It's an odd show where she and the guy in the white shirt she tries to convince him of things in the show. It's very strange, but yeah, she did a good job of responding, and that's a way to respond. We've seen that before a long time ago. Showed a video of Representative Maloney. I think he's from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but the guy was very he refused to take the bait. He was being pestered about, what about the words democratic socialist and all that, or socialist, and he was just not having it. And that's what you got to do when you see something like that. Okay, let's get. Are there any comments on that? I think this is a pretty powerful video.
Yeah,
They let me back in.
You're in? Everybody's in?
Well, there's nobody in the waiting room. So,
Okay.
she asked if could she have just said like nope after everything that he said, or would that even be giving him too much power in that situation?
That's a really interesting question, and I think because what ends up happening is the simple act of engaging these people and attempting to refute what they're doing brings their lies up to it tends to equalize things. It tends to level things. And so the fact that you're bothering to answer this person means that in a listener's or a viewer's eyes is that these things are worth arguing about. And I like what she did and didn't respond to a single one of them. And then at the end said, "What'd you bring me this guy for? He lies about everything," was basically her message. And I'm not, and they tried to get her to answer some of those charges, and she just absolutely refused to. So I think that's it.
On the Gish Gallup, the methodology is that there's two parts. One is this thing that's true takes 3 sentences to explain adequately and honestly, and the lie takes a half a sentence or 1 sentence. And then those 3 sentences that you have to say the thing correctly, each leads to a counter argument that's a single falsehood in 1 sentence. So if you say anything in there, you just opened up 3 more responses that are also lies.
Yeah.
And this was invented by a guy named Gish, who was a creationist who perfected it. And Mark Morano actually does it better than the original Dwayne Gish. And he's I almost admire him. He's so good at it.
Yeah, kind of like I almost admire Frank Luntz.
I also think that her long silence after he was finally done talking, I think really threw him off. Like he didn't know, he was expecting her to just go in and refute all the things that he said, and I think that's probably what he wanted. And when she didn't do that, it took him back. He didn't know what to say at first. So I thought that was an interesting response on her part too.
So, okay. Yeah, Hobie says a debate means that both sides are equal. So there's that. And there's some good links in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Okay, how about the noble lie and the big lie? The noble lie it's actually a somewhat old concept that for the greater good, as you define it, it's okay, even noble, to lie. Dick Cheney was a major practitioner of the noble lie. He felt, if you know better, which of course there's the folks who get to the top have this tendency to believe they know better than anybody else. If they believe that lying to people is going to result in the outcome that they want to see, and they think that's the right outcome, then it's their obligation to lie. So we see that quite often. And then the big lie, actually Trump's doing it, but it began with Hitler's observation that the great masses of the people will more easily fall victims to a great lie than a small one. And his buddy Goebbels said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. And and he goes on, and see if this sounds familiar. Uh, or he doesn't go on. Someone writing about him in the Jewish Virtual Library, interesting resource. Goebbels' primary rules were never allow the public to cool off, never admit a fault or wrong, never concede that there may be some good in your enemy, never leave room for alternatives, never accept blame, concentrate on one enemy at a time and blame him for everything that goes wrong. And if you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it. And that's Trump right there. I mean, wow. He had it down. And his great advisor, who is in the news today, Roger Stone. If you haven't seen HBO's Get Me Roger Stone, it came out a few years ago. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely must see it. It really taught this, what we just read is all of Roger Stone and Roy Cohen, his mentor, who was Joseph McCarthy's right-hand person. So anyway, well worth checking out. And okay, another one is ad nauseum, the relentless repetition of a poorly supported conclusion, but that by sheer familiarity may be taken to be the truth. And today's media can amplify repetition so well, that includes social media, that Soviet-era propagandists would be jealous. They're probably rolling over in their graves going, man, I wish I had social media. Trump, or Putin obviously does. And examples of this are everywhere. And in fact, one of them, tax and spend, we hear this repeated all over. And so we've got, and over and over and over. And that's why Biden's bill gets labeled as a spending bill. So those are some of the common ones out there that the Republicans use. It's worth going and just refreshing yourself on a list of ones that you find on the internet, just to see. Because again, being aware that it's happening, the woman in the video was aware that she was getting a gish gallup, that this guy had one going, and she knew what to do because she recognized it. So it's well worth doing that. And I've got two other things for you. One is, should we use propaganda? And we have always made a big deal here about using the knowledge you have about how people's brains work and or don't work the way we think they should or do, that you need to message with honesty and integrity. I know it puts a constraint on us that the Republicans don't have, but it is something that that is important. So when you're doing things, be honest about it. There are a few that in a way may work. There are two that I thought of. One is the bandwagon, the everybody's doing it. It's not a valid argument. I mean, going to do something because everyone's doing is a dumb reason to do it. But we also know that a lot of people, I mean, everyone, for example, does rolling stops at a stop sign from time to time. I don't see quite the harm in saying something like, a huge majority of Americans agree on background checks and feel threatened by guns. I don't see that as being all that terrible as a bandwagon. And the other one that I think you can use, which I'm calling a corollary of the bandwagon, is inevitability. And so, for example, a friend of mine, I don't think Phil is on tonight. Phil Adam is the electric car guy here in Minnesota. And Philip has testified at the legislature. And we were talking about this. And the renewable power and electric cars, they're inevitable. It's happening. It's already begun. And I think it's important for us that, that doesn't, just because it's happening, doesn't logically make renewables the right thing to do. That argument alone does not, that is just not, it's not an argument for doing it just because it's going to happen anyway. But this then brings up questions for lawmakers, which is basically, this is inevitable. Solar is already cheaper than coal. It's on its way to being cheaper than other things. This is happening. Investment's already going on. The only question is are you as a lawmaker going to help that move forward, or are you going to just be in the way?
Or are we as a citizen going to make it move forward?
Yes. Yes, also.
It's called a democracy.
Yes, it is, for good reason, right?
Yes.
And Gene, just to comment on that, we've talked about this before, but it's the locus of control. This is something Lisa has spoken to me about in some of the work she's done. And the locus of control seems to always be placed on government or outside of the citizen. All these forces are against the citizen, and they all just operate all by themselves with nothing. In a democracy, the citizens are the government in the fundamental sense. We have every right. It is our right and our duty to make our lives better. So that means we send people to Washington to do our bidding, not the other way around. If we decide everybody in this country is going to get health care like everywhere else it's done in the world where it's cheaper and the outcomes are better, if we decide that as citizens, then we can do it.
Yes.
We can do it.
Yes.
This simple idea is something that I think needs to be in our messaging as often as possible. I've used the word citizen before because they're the people who vote. I have been called out on that, and sometimes I'll say the people have a right to do this because not everyone's a citizen. But that concept is really important, and it also brings your message into the space where you're doing the message, because both you and your listener are people who can do something about it, which was exactly your point, Jeannie, that we can do this, citizens can do this. And I just love that. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. And most change starts local.
Yep.
And moves its way up the chain. It's not just who we send to Washington, it's who we talk to here in our neighborhood. Who are our neighbors? What is our local city council doing? Et cetera, et cetera. It starts here and it works its way up.
Absolutely. And we can't be afraid, as we had a webinar, a couple webinars ago, about talking to people who we don't talk to. We have to have that discussion. Who sent, I think it was Gary Moorhead here, sent me something on a training that the conservatives have about Thanksgiving dinner. And I'll make sure we get links to that, to two things, the thing that Gary sent and otherwise. But their advice, actually, if you just change the examples, it was an absolutely excellent piece on how to have a conversation with people who disagree with you. What's the name of it, Gary?
Oh, it was something like how to talk to people who aren't as smart as you.
Yeah. It was, or how to talk at Thanksgiving dinner with people you know are wrong.
That's it. How to talk with people over the holidays that you know are already wrong. Yeah.
And like I say, that particular thing was really good advice all the way through. Just change the examples to our examples, but it very, very well thought out, well done. We've made the same in our webinar. We made many of the same points, and then I sent back to Gary what I got from the DCCC a few years ago, which was miserable. It was the same Thanksgiving thing. It said how to talk to your relatives at Thanksgiving, and in that. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeannie, you were going to say something.
The most important thing about a conversation is listening.
Yes.
So it's how do you listen to everyone, not just those that you think are just like you. And if you want to live a dull life, just hang out with people that are identical to you. Yeah. Have you ever worked in a working setting where everybody's the same? Is that boring and dull and not creative? Or if you work in a working setting where people are different and have different points of views and different backgrounds, that's the work group that gets things done and makes real changes. and you listen. And God gave us 2 of these and 1 of these. All right. Use them in that proportion.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. I mean, it reminds me, and in those places where you don't get to mix with other people, it's counterproductive. And the example is the MIT Media Lab, super high tech media lab at MIT, where they brought in, I think I don't know if it was I.M. Pei or some famous architect to design this building, and this architect designed it to please himself and apparently no one else, because in there, if people had their offices, and then outside their office was a little the walkway that went around an open atrium, and so you'd run across people on your floor. And then when you got to the bottom, it's a little smaller, and so people would just exit the building. So what happened is people who were at MIT who could use the Media Lab ended up going to this building that had been built in World War II to be just a big place to build some kind of war machinery. And there was just a big giant empty space, and they just build what they need. You need an experiment that's 3 stories tall, you just build it. So they built their own offices in there, and they love it because they can take it apart and do what they want to do. But they also constantly run across people doing different things than they're doing. And some of the greatest things that have happened in science are these great friendships that people have, where they do listen to other people and stop for a moment and just let someone else go. And when you're at Thanksgiving doing that, first off, it takes the temperature down quite a bit. And these are people you care about. I mean, your crazy Uncle Frank may be nuts, but you still care about him, right?
Or if you haven't listened to him, you may only be thinking he's crazy. He may not be until you may learn that he's not crazy once you start listening to him.
Yep. Well, and as a matter of fact, quite often, again, as we've mentioned before, that people will that if you haven't listened to somebody, you may not know that they actually agree with you. Conservatives, oddly enough, they've been fed the same stuff so much that it's all been the same stuff they've heard over year after year. They've never considered another viewpoint. So there's that. You may be giving them something brand new to think about, but you may hear something in what they say that tells you there's a way that we have common ground, a place where we can talk about something. And I'll also point out for anybody else who may have been a salesman in this, I was in sales for years. I sold really expensive television equipment. And so I didn't like to make mistakes because it was very costly. And one thing I learned is I sat down with my customer, and the first thing I did is I asked them a bunch of questions and just listened. I said, give me a tour of the place. Show me what you do. What happens here? Who's your boss? What's your department look like? And that was my first at least couple visits anyway, because I wanted to know everything. And I cannot tell you the number of times that kept me from saying something that would have totally tanked a deal. I mean, just keeping my ears open and saying and listening. You're absolutely right. We have some other comments. I do want to play a video that I think sums a lot of this up. But maybe I'll do that, and then we'll come back for more conversation as we are at 8 o'clock. Let me play this video, and I'll point out that finally this, in my estimation, is from the finest X-Files episode entitled The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat. And it features the brilliant Stuart Margolin, who is Angel on the Rockford Files. Stuart Margolin is playing Dr. They. Remember when they say? You hear this all the time, they say this. So he turns out it's him. Let me play this for you.
As long as the truth gets out, they don't care whether the truth gets out because the public no longer knows what's meant by the truth.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, no one can tell the difference anymore between what's real and what's fake.
There's still an objective truth, an objective reality.
So what? I mean, you take this Mandela Effect. Well, in the old days, I would never have come out and admitted to you that, yes, I can change people's collective memories. And that would have meant that I can control the past. And if that's true, well, as Orson Welles once said, he who controls the past controls the future.
It was George Orwell that said that.
For now, maybe. Anyway, the point is, I can tell you all of this right out in the open, because it doesn't matter who knows about it. They won't know whether to believe it or not.
To be honest, I'm not believing any of this.
Well, believe what you want to believe. That's what everybody does nowadays anyway. You're only proving my point, you twit. But full disclosure, you're right, I can't control people's minds. Although it turns out you don't really have to. All you need is some people to think it's possible. And then you've sown the seeds of uncertainty. All you really need is a laptop.
So that's what this has all been about? The spread of online disinformation?
Maybe. You know, our current president once said something truly profound. He said, nobody knows for sure.
What was he referring to?
What does it matter?
I just love that. And I will send the transcript, but I mean, Stuart Margolin does a great job, and it's really, it just, the whole conversation just shows you that you have no idea, you know, that everything is all muddled up. That's what the propagandists want. It's all muddled up. You don't know what's real, what's not real, and that's the point. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, I thought I would throw that up there. And any other questions? People have any other questions here? Any comments? We generally end right at about 8, or technically the presentation part of the program at about 8 o'clock, but we hang out and jabber for a while afterwards. So if anybody has a burning question, go for it. I don't know if there's some in the chat I can look at too.
There's a lot of
occurred to me
articles that I will include in the follow-up email. Trying to keep track of all the things we said we'd send out. So, but I'll send these out that are on here.
George, there's a subset of my messaging. I've been doing a lot of messaging work, and lately, my target audience is not persuadables and it's not Republicans, it's Democrats. So, for example, I said something in the post in the chat that I thought was a compelling fact, which is that if everybody in Massachusetts today was magically given the car that they say they want, most people in Massachusetts would be driving electric cars today. So that's it. The other day, I was in a meeting of environmentalists, and one of the people in the meeting said, she lives way up north. She said, we can't have electric cars up here. They just don't work. It's too cold. Can't even have the kind that have the gas engine that charges the battery. That is a Democrat who's on an environmental organization saying something that is simply not true, as you know, if you check with Phil. I have found that within our own party, a lot of issues that I think we all agree on, like we have to address climate change, we have to electrify our economy and so on, are just full of issues, of elements where Democrats do not believe things that are true or have falsehoods in their mind. And when you talk about persuadable, they are the most persuadable people in the world because they actually want to believe we can do this. They just have their facts.
The Fox Mulder poster.
Yes. And so, you know, and so that's a kind of in a way, it's like the message doesn't have to be it isn't as hard to get the message across to people who actually want to believe what you want to believe, what you want them to know. I mean, we want them to know the facts about these things, and they want to know the facts about these things. But I think it's really difficult. It's really hard. We as a party have to be behind certain issues 100%. You can't have a situation where there's 75% of Democrats are all for addressing climate change. The other 25% don't care or don't think we can or have a relatively counterproductive viewpoint. That's not correct. I mean, if they're correct, that's fine. But if they're not correct, and I think that's a problem we have within our own party.
Hey, George, Greg, I would just like to go back to something that George was talking about. I don't know, was it last time or a couple times ago, the typology thing? And, you know, there's different kinds of people on the right and different kinds of people on the left. And if everyone was, let's see, what is that typology group, George, solid progressives or ultimate progressives or something like that.
Ultra.
Ultra progressives.
Okay.
If everyone was one of those who's in the Democratic Party, then what Greg is saying could happen, and actually kind of like already would have happened, right? Or maybe not, because maybe just could happen, because you still have to educate the ultra progressives, and then they're the persuadables, and then they're persuaded. But not everybody is as what do we want to say, as open to change as the ultra progressives. But even among the ultra progressives, you have to provide all the facts and all the education that to counter the stuff that's like right in front of your eyes, because we all live in the world as it is, and it's the ultra progressives who would like to make it, different. But not even all of them are, as Greg was saying, fully educated enough about what actually it could be. So that's
Gary,
that's the challenge.
That's really right. And I think it's really important to distinguish between a point of view, like, should we have Medicare for all, or should we have some other kind of health care, and basic information that's just simply, the electric cars. George mentioned Phil. I asked Phil what to do about this point of view, and the conclusion we drew was we're going to drive his Tesla up to visit our friend in January. She's simply wrong, and she's wrong because a lot of people are wrong about things because it's not your area of expertise, and it's hard to keep up. And it isn't a political wrong. It's just don't know yet.
But if you make it tangible by actually driving the Tesla up there, or the Prius or something, and hey, you want to go for a ride? It's 30 below zero. Let's go for a ride.
You'd make it more tangible if you actually recorded your visit.
Well, we would be absolutely live streaming this.
Yeah,
I'm not going to waste the trip to the Canadian border. I make a really big deal out of it.
Yeah, but let me point out, we're all human. Everybody, left to right, we're all human beings, and humans think the way humans think. It's not necessarily the way we think they do. And then I also can't help but hope that by doing the stuff we're all doing and all learning here, that we will be able to describe what a liberal is, whatever stripe liberal it is. That we have some ability, starting with our core values. Because, one of the reasons I started this is because you ask people what a Republican is and they'll tell you, pretty much everybody, small government, low taxes. You ask people what a Democrat is and they go, well, they kind of want to help people. And that's kind of it. And
please don't label us.
No.
Don't label us.
Right, but what I'm saying is that's what is. I don't think people have articulated. I don't think people have well articulated an idea of what a liberal is, and that has a lot to do with what we're doing here, and other people are doing this around the country too, because it's important. I think if we were all more tuned into the things, to our core values and the things that we want for the world, and we're able to talk about them better, then I think that helps us all approach these issues differently and better. Yeah, I hear you, Gina. I'm not trying to label people that way. I'm saying we all need, myself included, I have an understanding of what it means to be a Democrat or a liberal, but there are holes in that. There are things that I need to learn. I constantly keep my eyes and ears open for it. I liken it to my brain being Swiss cheese, and the holes in there need some filling, And it's by just doing this and learning what we can and learning from each other, which is what I like so much on these calls, is that so much wisdom is out there, because we're all reading, we're all learning, we've all formed opinions about things, gained expertise, and sharing that's the essence of a community. And when we build that community here, that's organizing, man. That's power. We have a community.
Well, George, I think if you're looking for filling for those Swiss cheese balls, given the time of year that it is, I would just suggest something with cream cheese, cranberries, and walnuts in it, and everyone, you'll do you well.
I'm going to be careful about the filling that I put into this, because I've been filling that thing up for quite a while. But yeah, we are going to cook up our turkey and do that. And all right, and thanks. I'm seeing some new people on here. That is great. Really, thanks for being here. You are always welcome to join the conversation. Just because some of us might know each other, please hop in there, and we want to hear from you. We really, look at all of the wisdom we get from people when we do this. So thank you for coming an awful lot. Please come back. Tell all your friends.
And thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
You
folks.
guys, you do great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
connectionslab.org.